Hi everyone, good Wednesday afternoon and welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the News and Politics Show. Would like to thank Laura Afonso and all the guests that came in to talk about new food and drink here in the state. But we're going to go a little south, as we usually do once a week, to check in with Jennifer Lawless down at the University of Virginia. Jennifer, how are things?
They're plugging along.
They are plugging along. Obviously, this time last week you were in the, not you, but the state proverbially, in the hot seat with what had transpired between the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. Does it look like things have cooled off down there?
It's a little unsettled because things have cooled off in that the conversation seems to have moved to behind closed doors, but there are still 2 and possibly 3 elected officials who a lot of people are waiting on to resign. Ralph Northam has said that he's not. Justin Fairfax wants to wait for an investigation that clears him. Mark Herring, who was sort of the least offensive of the offenders, I think a week ago would have thought he would be governor by now, and now that doesn't look to be the case. So there just still seems to be this pretty substantial air of uncertainty. But the longer it goes on, the more likely it is that nobody's going to step down.
And how unlikely does that make that scenario with, again, those top 3 all being Democratic officials? Is there just blood in the water? Are they all just jockeying to climb over, except, the governor? But, I mean, you say it's behind closed doors, but what do you think that political climate looks like?
I mean, I think some of it has to do with what can make the Democratic Party remain competitive. We have off-year elections here, so the entire state legislature is currently campaigning for re-election in November.
Okay.
And the way that they handle this kind of situation, the way that they speak and talk about racism, the way that they speak and talk about sexual assault and sexual harassment, all plays into these campaigns. And so I think everybody is sort of taking a step back to try and figure out what makes the most sense, not only for these particular individuals, but also for the slate of Democratic candidates and the future of the Democratic Party.
You do raise a good point. Obviously, being in cycle, being this year, it's obviously going to be topics on the campaign trail. Let's get a little outside Virginia. Let's head up to maybe Minnesota. Comments made on Twitter this week by Representative Omar regarding Israel. Calls for her to apologize. She did apologize. Here we are Wednesday. What next?
So obviously, she apologized for what many perceived to be her retweeting and commenting on anti-Semitic tropes. And I think this highlights a couple of things. First, the Democratic Party has demonstrated that it's far more willing than the Republican Party to hold its own members accountable when they say things that fly in the face of democratic values. We've seen that with calls for Ralph Northam to step down because of racism. We've seen that with calls for Justin Fairfax to step down because of allegations of sexual assault. We saw that with Al Franken as well. And now we're seeing an immediate request for an apology when it comes to anti-Semitism. And so, I think that it really we see in these examples a clear distinction between the way that the party's leadership compared to Republican Party leaders handle their own members. That said, the Republicans have had no problem jumping on this and suggesting that there's no place in Congress for somebody like this when it's a standard to which they've obviously never held their own members.
So we think she survives. We think the issue gets behind her. Does it have any remaining legs?
Well, the thing that's tricky about the House of Representatives is that there's a permanent campaign. So from the minute you get elected, you're campaigning for re-election. And the first time that you're elected is obviously the hardest race you'll ever run. But that second time comes in a close second, which means that that's the best shot at somebody defeating you. And so when a freshman member of Congress makes a mistake or says something that's racist or anti-Semitic or sexist or anything else, it suggests to other potential candidates that maybe this person is vulnerable. So even if this doesn't have any more legs as far as Nancy Pelosi or the institution of Congress right now is concerned, I wouldn't be surprised if it makes its way not only into the general election, but perhaps primaries for 2020 as well.
There have been those who tried to say that by her comments or retweets or accusations that she was not making anti-Semitic remarks. Is there any validity to that?
I mean, if it walks like a duck, and basically it doesn't even matter because perceptions drive reality in politics. And the perception of impropriety, the perception of racism, the perception of anti-Semitism is as important as any of those things. And there's no question, regardless of her intent, that that's how the tweets were perceived.
Let's get really local here back in Rhode Island. A new poll released yesterday by the Citizens for Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness released a poll that said 73.8% of people in Rhode Island believe that abortion should not be legal up until birth. Let's talk a little bit. You've had some pretty strong reactions to this poll.
So as somebody whose entire career is based on survey research, when I see a poll that's completely insane, I feel like I have to call it out. And frankly, nobody favors abortion until birth. That's not a thing. No doctor would perform abortion until birth. If you try to end a pregnancy and a fetus is viable, the fetus is delivered. So these are insanely severe mischaracterizations of what is actually at stake in Rhode Island. That is not what Roe v. Wade allows. That is not what codifying Roe versus Wade would allow. And, frankly, I was somewhat surprised that only 73% of people were opposed to that. I would have thought it would be closer to 100%.
Well, I appreciate, Jennifer, you're taking the time to Skype in today here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. As always, it will be a whole new week next week when we hear from you. So thank you again for your time.
Of course.
Okay, thanks. We're going to let Jennifer Lawless go. We're going to get a little more local here, so don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for the 4 o'clock News and Politics show this Wednesday. A woman who needs very little introduction, Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea. Thank you for coming into the studio today.
Thanks, Kate.
Appreciate it. Lots going on. Yeah. A release from the office today we'll get to in a little bit. But as you said, right here, very close by, you want to talk about at the State Archives, 150 years of big ideas in Little Rhodey.
That's right. It's a great new exhibit that we have. It's probably our 7th or 8th even, that we've done at the Rhode Island State Archives. A lot of people, when I came in as Secretary of State, didn't know that we have this amazing collection of almost 4 centuries of records. It's something very few other states have. This particular exhibit focuses on 150 years of big ideas in the business community, because Rhode Island actually has had a long history of innovation in industry. And so you can come by and look at some old patent models. You can look at incorporation papers for things like, some of the companies that we've had for a long time. It's really quite nice. But really what I'm trying to do through that exhibit and the other ones that we've had is to show Rhode Islanders the richness of records and history that we have. and really trying to make a compelling case, along with the activities that we're doing in schools all over Rhode Island to promote Rhode Island history and Rhode Island civics, and really promote the need for a real state archives and Rhode Island history center. So, which we've done a site selection study for, and we would hopefully place right across from the State House. It turns out we have over 10,000 students that come every year to the State House. If your kid is not one of those kids, you can call my office and we can set up the class. Or you can go on our website, which is sos.ri.gov. And so what we want to do is to show people that we have the kind of thing that would really be an anchor to historic tourism in the state. Other places have it, and they don't have as much history as we do. Massachusetts has a fabulous building, and yet their history is not one of inclusiveness and tolerance. I think it is time for our country to realize that we were the birthplace of freedom of religion. And what better place to do it through a facility that actually hosts and shows off our records.
So when you first saw this exhibit, I'm sure you were working alongside them as well, but what was your reaction? Did you have any wow kind of surprise moments?
The most amazing thing for me is, so for example, there is this one letter by Anne Franklin, who is Benjamin Franklin's sister-in-law and owned the Newport Mercury Tribune, which is the newspaper in Newport. So back during Revolutionary times, Rhode Island had a female owner publisher of a newspaper.
Wow.
And she was petitioning the General Assembly to be able to be the printer for their acts. And so we have this really wonderful treasures of, it's like our own little time capsule that we get to go into to check to see what things were like. And I think it also gives, at times like these that we're facing in our country, where things are so stressful and seem so, and sometimes some really, really almost hopeless because we're so against each other and stuff, that there have been other moments in Rhode Island, and not just Rhode Island's history, but our country's history, and people have come up with solutions, and then we've changed course. And so I think it shows that hope.
Gives that broader picture sometimes to get out of your myopic view of where things are at right now. But 150 years of big ideas in Little Brody. Let's talk about this year. Just released from your office was your 2019 legislative agenda, and I just want to go through your three kind of bucket items. Let's talk about early in-person voting.
Yes, this is my fifth attempt to get this done. Hopefully it will be my last. And it really responds to something Rhode Islanders want, right? So we've seen an increase, and I brought the numbers. From 2014 to 2018, we saw an increase of 119% in emergency mail ballots.
Wow.
That's the process where you have to go 20 days before the election. It kind of looks like an early in-person voting, but it's not, because you have to fill out a lot of paperwork, and you don't see your ballot go into that voting machine. And so if something's wrong with your ballot, you don't get to fix it. You lose your vote. So we want to make sure that Rhode Islanders have confidence in the system, and part of that is to have early in-person voting. You would come in 20 days before the election, just like you do now, and you show your ID, you get checked in, you're given a ballot, you fill it out, and you put it into the machine yourself. That's the beauty of it. And so I think, like I said, all over Rhode Island, I'm seeing increases like this. There are communities like Westerly and Central Falls that have actually told people, come in on this weekend or come in at this time so that you can help reduce the lines on election day. My bill would provide for Saturday and Sunday, 4 hours on a Saturday, 4 hours on a Sunday, for people to come in and do their early voting. It's time for it.
And as you said, looking to hopefully be a fifth time the charm. Why the opposition?
Change in the election system is hard to begin with. Some people were concerned about the cost. I think we've answered those issues. Just trying to make sure that we provide that opportunity. I think this is something Rhode Islanders want. And, I think as they've seen the increase, right? Because at the beginning when I first introduced it, people were like, well, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Well, you're seeing the demand. 119% increase is clearly a demand. So.
And talking about timing, let's talk a little bit about moving Rhode Island's primaries.
The shame. Yes. So I have now informed the General Assembly, and this is part of the reason why I introduced the bill last year as well, but this year it's for real. we will not be able to meet federal law this year, not this year, next year with the elections. The federal law requires that we send out ballots to uniformed overseas people at least 45 days before the general election, so that they have time to get the ballot and then get it back to us. Well, the problem is that because of the timing of our close primary to the general election, and now you have the auditing process that needs to happen as well, the risk limiting audits, there just isn't that time. And so I'm petitioning through this legislation that the General Assembly move the primary from September to the third Tuesday in August after the first Monday. So around the third week. So it's not Victory Day week. It's actually the following week, hopefully.
That's interesting. Yeah. You mentioned that Rhode Island could be, as you said, in violation of federal election law. So this isn't something that you're going to have to do some twisting. I mean, does it seem like there's no choice?
Well, I would hope that people would see it this way. I mean, my brother's a colonel in the U.S. Army. I feel very deeply, as I know many of our elected leaders do, that our military men and women who are fighting out there for our right and for our freedom have that opportunity. And I wouldn't want Rhode Island. Rhode Island's only one of 2 states that are left with this late primary. Yep. We need to do this. We need to do this year so that next year, which is a presidential year, we make sure that we protect the right to vote of our military.
What would happen if we didn't do it?
So we would probably get a reprimand from the Department of Justice. I don't want to be there when that happens. So I'm hoping that we don't have to deal with it.
Get a reprimand. That seems, but so it would just be a slap on the wrist?
My office is right now looking into it, but it's more than just the violation. It's really that it really affects the ability of our uniformed men and women who are abroad to be able to exercise their right to vote.
So what would happen then if we didn't change it? Would their votes be counted?
Their votes would be counted. It's just not, we wouldn't be confident that they would be able to get us their ballots in time.
Yep.
So they're counted as long as they get to us before the deadline, which I think is 8 p.m. on election day.
But just some concern about the suppression, if you will, not getting it in time.
Of getting that, yeah.
Speaking of voting, one of the other facets of your legislative agenda, one that affects a large number of Rhode Islanders, because as we know, majority of Rhode Islanders are unaffiliated voters, pertains to the unaffiliated status and what happens when someone goes into a primary, then oops, forgets to disaffiliate and has a whole headache when they go to vote later on.
2 years later, they go to vote as an independent and they're told, nope, you can't do that because you are already in this party. So this bill, again, listening to Rhode Islanders as I go around, they said, why do I have to disaffiliate on the way out? I want to remain an independent voter. Why don't we just keep it that way? And then if I want to stay, then I would fill out the paperwork. So this bill would basically allow for that. It would say if you're an independent voter, you can choose whichever primary, but then on the way out, you wouldn't have to disaffiliate. You would just stay unaffiliated unless you make an affirmative action to actually stay in the party. And it also would change. Right now, the period of disaffiliation is 95 days before a primary. And very few people have it in their heads 95 days before a primary to either disaffiliate or to check their affiliation. What usually happens is people will check, the week or 2 weeks before the primary.
Go, oh no, I didn't need the 95 days.
I didn't. I can't change. So this would make it the same as voter registration, which is too long. It's 30 days, but that's in the Constitution, and at least it would make those deadlines the same.
The same, yeah.
Your voter registration deadline and your disaffiliation deadline would match.
So I have to ask you while I have you in here, because I know some press is asking you about the release of the voter database.
Yes.
So can you talk to us about the status of that?
So actually, that's my third bill that I've introduced, and I've actually made a point of saying that at the time to the Journal, we want to have this debate in the public square. Absolutely. So right now, the general laws do not give any guidance as to what should be the release of information from the public voter file. So let's just do it. Let's just introduce a bill, have that conversation, and have the legislature give guidance as to what information. I believe that people, and what I've heard uniformly across Rhode Island is, thank you, Secretary Gorbea, for protecting our identity from theft. They understand that having released a voter database with just the year of birth in a electronic format that aggregates all of the voters is enough information to hold the secretary accountable. You don't need a full date of birth. The full date of birth has really become much more of an asset to people who are trying to do identity theft than it was 15 years ago when this practice started.
So if that is in fact the sticking point, is there a middle ground? Could there just be the date of
I offered that middle ground. I basically, what I said was, instead of giving you a full data, like a CD or a DVD with all of the voters' dates of birth, I will only give you that information with year of birth.
Yeah.
And with year of birth, you can pretty much determine, and we ran the numbers, 99.5% of the records are available as individuals. There's always some people who maybe were born in the same year, John Smith. I get it. But then you can actually go into my office and we will show you that information. I just don't want to give everybody in the universe this data that they can then match with other things on the dark web and really put in danger the identity of Rhode Islanders. And so I had to balance. It was one of the toughest decisions I made in my 4 years, was that balancing act between open records and transparency. And what we came up with, I think, meets open records because it gives you a ton of information to hold the Secretary of State accountable with, while at the same time protecting the rights of individuals to their privacy.
Do we know the other states where they stand on this release of information?
Over half of the states only give year of birth.
Okay. So there's a precedent.
There is. Well, I would say there's a ton of other people who believe like we do.
Okay. And then finally, we'll have you here. The office just got some national recognition.
Yes, it's very exciting. The National Association of Secretaries of State chose us, along with 2 other states, for their Ideas Awards. So we're finalists in this contest that really highlights good ideas by the Secretary of States across the country. Ours happened to be in the area of civic education, a passion of mine. And we also got national recognition for 2 of our star employees. And so Rob Rock, our elections director, is now part of the executive committee of the National Association of State Elections Directors.
Okay.
And our state librarian, who I know you've probably spoken to, and all of the journalists and a lot of people rely on for great information, Megan Hamlin Black, has been awarded is one of 50 librarians across the country. So there's one in every state. She's the one in Rhode Island for an American Library Association award. And so she's getting a new leaders kind of training. It's really fantastic. And it shows the quality of employees and the leadership that we have at the Department of State. So I'm very proud to give them a shout out.
We wanted to make sure that we recognize them while
Yes.
we had you here in studio. So between covering the exhibit at the Rhode Island State Archives, 150 years of big ideas in Little Rhodey, to legislation that the office is looking at this year, I think we have run the gamut, and I appreciate your taking the time to come in.
Thank you so much, Kate.
Okay,
Take care.
Secretary Gorbea, don't go anywhere. We're going to be right back here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. Okay, great job. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for tuning in for this 4 o'clock Wednesday afternoon show. I'd like to thank Jennifer Lawless and Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea for coming in, and I'd like to thank my next guest, John Flaherty with GrowSmart Rhode Island.
Hello,
Thank
Kate.
you so much.
Good to see you.
Clearly you've got some resources at hand here because we're going to be talking about a new survey done in conjunction with Roger Williams looking at transit-oriented development areas in the state, in particular 5 cities. The opportunities, the constraints, the challenges. Let's talk about the impetus for the study and how it was conducted.
Sure. So we are actually located at Roger Williams University, and we have access to students. And so GrowSmart and Housing Works recognize that Rhode Island has a shortage of housing. Where are we going to accommodate more housing if we want to see some growth? And so we looked at the opportunities in Rhode Island for doing transit-oriented development, which is really housing and commerce, this mixed-use compact development around nodes where transit exists or is planned.
And how important is that? It's funny, people come through traffic on 95 at any given time. Is this really, as you said, the need for more housing is to look at how to address it or those congestion and transportation issues?
Yeah, it was transportation, and it's also availability of housing stock. So in 2016, Housing Works did a study. They looked at what the future need is for housing, and they came to the conclusion that Rhode Island needs about 40,000, up to 40,000 units of housing by 2025. That's not that far away. And so to the extent that we want to attract jobs, and we have been doing that a bit, we need places for people to live. And so you want to do that in a way that's sustainable, that's not going to contribute to congestion on the highways. And so we looked at where are those locations throughout the state where they lend themselves to transit-oriented development. And I'm not suggesting that just because we've found them that it's just going to happen like that. There are some things that have to happen at the local level and the state level in order to realize that.
So how did you get to those steps? Let's talk a little bit, especially about the student involvement,
Sure.
looking at those 5 cities, really identifying those areas. I mean, how did this kind of get off the ground?
Yeah, so we started about a year ago, and we worked with 2 teams of students, one in the fall semester, one in the spring semester, where the first group really did more of a GIS analysis of what are the conditions that support transit-oriented development? What are the things you need to have in place? Then the second group of students, we narrowed the field of places we looked at, and then they divided into teams of 4 and 5, and they did a deep dive into those communities to really study them and to see, look at the constraints, environmental and otherwise, infrastructure. Where could we achieve housing, additional housing? And they actually come up with, in those 5 communities, 73,000 new housing units, the capacity for them. So it's there. We have to activate that.
And so what were some of the challenges, as you said, when you looked at the combination of looking at housing and transportation opportunities? How much of the state will have to be a stakeholder in this process? And should there be a bigger look, or should it happen at the very local level?
It needs to happen at both the local level and the state level. So a lot of communities have their own comprehensive community plan, and they actually embrace the idea of encouraging housing and development in these locations already.
Okay.
That's a first, because this is not about telling local communities where to build. And so then you have to look at what is the responsibility at the state level. In order for transit-oriented development to work, called TOD for short, you need the T. And so, yes, we have to up our game when it comes to how our transit system works, because that's just an essential component. And the good news is that our state is right now in the process of looking at our transit system from top to bottom to imagine what it could be in the future. So the timing is really good to look at how the transit system is working and can work, and how do we make that work with development.
So you've got the survey. We'll provide the link. You've got the paper copy in front of you here. But if you want to go through and see what was produced again by GrowSmart and Roger Williams, what next? What now?
So now we're getting the word out, and we're talking to the communities, and we're using the data in here to be making the case, for example, for the state to become more of an active partner with municipalities for the needed infrastructure. So one example that I can give you of our neighboring states are actually doing a lot in this regard, and so we look to Massachusetts. We can all identify with downtown Attleboro, right? It's not too far from Rhode Island. And the case in Attleboro is they had a comprehensive plan that called for greater development right around their train station. They had a developer that was interested in helping them to implement that, but they had a huge hurdle, and that was the infrastructure.
Okay.
They needed a bigger pipe, essentially, and so they went to the state. Massachusetts has a program that Rhode Island is trying to emulate to assist municipalities with infrastructure in those types of locations. They got the grant, they put the pipe in, the developer put the building up, multifamily residential building, and it's 100% occupied. And now that developer's working on building 2 and 3. So this can happen. We see it happening right across our border, and we're hopeful that in Rhode Island we'll be able to follow suit.
So what was the de facto pipe that Attleboro needed?
They needed a sewer pipe.
Literally a sewer pipe.
A sewer pipe. Because in that case, their infrastructure was very old, and it was outdated, and they needed something that was
What,
that
New
had
England
more
has
capacity.
old infrastructure?
Yes, we do. We have a lot of old infrastructure.
So you talk about the proximity to existing transportation angles. Let's talk a little bit. We know Pawtucket and Central Falls, for instance, are looking at an opportunity for growth there. Does that have potential?
It does. So Pawtucket and Central Falls are going to get a new bus hub and a train station combined in one location in 2020 and 2022, respectively. The trains will come in 2022. And so they've got about 2 million square feet of underutilized or vacant mill space right within the quarter-mile walk shed of that station. So it's an opportunity there, but they need to, and together, the city and the state need to make the investments in the infrastructure so that it will attract the private development. That's what it's about.
So when I said next steps in talking with folks and stakeholders about this report, is this going to be taking up the lion's share of your time? What else can we expect from GrowSmart in 2019?
So we have a busy legislative agenda, but one of the things on that agenda is to get the Municipal Infrastructure Grant Program funded. The legislature
I'm sensing a theme here.
Yes, well, it all does tie together. And so we're looking to advance the transit agenda. We have to have better transit. We have to have access to resources for the infrastructure that's necessary. I mean, this kind of thinking is not going to just evolve on its own. The state and the municipalities have to be partners to make it happen. But I think that the one thing we do know is that the municipalities do already embrace the concept. That's what they want for their communities. We just have to connect the dots to be able to make it happen.
As you said, get the requisite pipes, and literally sometimes
Exactly.
that can be sewer pipes.
Exactly.
Well, John Flaherty with GrowSmart, I appreciate your taking the time to come
Thank
in.
you, Kate.
If you're interested in the report, we'll of course provide a link to it as well, and hopefully we'll have you back in soon.
Terrific.
Okay, John
Thanks
Flaherty,
very much.
Thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be back with our last guest here in the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigate Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the News and Politics Show. Nothing more dominating the news of politics probably in the last 24 hours than the release of the poll from Citizens for Life, Liberty, Pursuit, and Happiness pertaining to Rhode Islanders' views on abortion in the state. And I have Carrie Jeffrey, who is pretty instrumental in the rollout of this poll. So Carrie, thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in. The release went out and clearly a lot of reaction on all sides. But let's take the step back a little bit to your involvement with this group, the decision to first start with a poll, and then we'll go from there.
So you heard of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? Well, this is Mrs. Jeffrey went to Providence to the hearings, and I kept hearing about this poll that said 71% of Rhode Islanders support abortion. So I went there to talk about my experience with Planned Parenthood, and what it was is I had gotten a survey, this is like 30 years ago, from Planned Parenthood saying, can you believe those anti-abortionists, they want to take away your right to have an abortion up to 9 months. And I was like, what? I'm not for that. And so so to hear that poll at the hearing over and over again, 71%, I was like really wondering about that. So I thought, and then I found out it was just one question, and it was, do you support legalizing abortion? And so it really didn't define it. And then on top of it, with talking to friends and family, and many of them, most of them are liberal Democrats, they were kind of, disgusted by this idea, and they, reading about what was happening in New York, it was like, we don't want New York's extreme abortion laws here. So we started doing a petition, and we were getting like over 700 signatures in a day. And so we were like, okay, we're riding a tidal wave of disgust. Let's put a number on it. Let's get a poll and see, how accurate we could get it.
So talk a little bit about the decision-making process of going through and asking the questions. The data that came out from the poll was 73.8% of Rhode Islanders believe that abortion should not be legal up until birth. A number of other questions as well as to Rhode Islanders' views about when abortion should be legal. Let's talk a little bit about the decision-making and how you came up with the questions that were in the poll.
So, it's a complicated issue. I'm not a medical person. I'm not a lawyer. But all I was trying to do was find the most accurate pollster that I could to give information to the General Assembly that they could actually make laws on. And so it's not, we're not a political organization, we're not religious, we're just providing information.
And so, of course, you've gotten a ton of feedback, I'm sure, since the poll was released yesterday. Plenty of folks in the pro-choice community said, specifically as it regards to the Reproductive Health Care Act, that some of these questions didn't necessarily address that, because they said the Reproductive Health Care Act would codify Roe v. Wade in Rhode Island and would not allow for abortion to be legal up until 9 months. So what was your reaction when you heard some of this reaction to the questions that were posed?
All right, so like I said, I'm not a lawyer, but in my mind, Roe v. Wade looks like it was written by Rush Limbaugh compared to this act. And I can't even call it a Reproductive Health Care Act because it's not reproduction, it's killing a baby. All right, it's not health because nobody will answer the question, how is it healthy for a woman to have a second or third trimester abortion? And thirdly, the act itself, on the bottom of the first page, beginning of the second page, says no one can be restricted from terminating a pregnancy, including regarding fetal viability. All right, so I'm not going to get the words right, but that's the concept.
So do you think, and this is the way we posed it today, does this change the debate on Smith Hill?
All I'm doing is I'm not political, I'm not religious. I do have faith because after all, this is Rhode Island, and Roger Williams came here for freedom of religion, not freedom from religion, and so I'm just here to provide information. That's it.
So what now? The poll has been released. You said, you're not political. Will you be up at the State House testifying if the opportunity arises?
Well, I'll have to consider each invitation, but what I would say is that the petitions that we have the online and written petitions, we have over 8,000 signatures against these two specific bills. So I think there's a lot of information for lawmakers to listen to. I think they need to represent average Rhode Islanders versus Planned Parenthood and what they want.
And so, as you mentioned, there's petitions available as well, because that was my next question. What now for the Citizens for Life, Liberty, and Pursuit of Happiness?
Well, we're going to keep gathering those signatures, keep gauging how people really don't want these laws.
And, as we talked about getting some of that feedback, some folks had accused it of being a push-pull or leading questions. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, what I would say is I'm pretty sure what was released is just the top lines and not the script. Okay, so you can't, get into that.
About the actual methodology of the poll. Do you imagine you'll go back in the field at any point to gauge Rhode Islanders' viewpoints?
Depending on the result of this interview, maybe.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come in, because, as we said, it has really dominated the news cycle for the past 24 hours, and will continue to do so moving forward, with a lot of reactions on all sides of the issue. But having been so intimately involved with this, wanted to have you in, so I appreciate your taking the time.
All right.
Carrie Jeffrey, thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
And thank you, everyone, for watching today, as we brought you the latest in news and politics here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center, from Jennifer Lawless down at the University of Virginia, Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, and then John Flaherty with GrowSmart Rhode Island. Be sure to join us tomorrow when we're back on live here at GoLocal. In the meantime, catch us on Facebook and catch us on GoLocalProv.com. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.